For this problem, we will be factoring a difference of two squares. When we factor, we want to follow a series of steps to help us make sure that we factor correctly. So keep this in mind as you go through your factoring problems. The first thing you want to do is look for a GCF. And when we look for a GCF, we look at all the terms in the polynomial to see if there's a greatest common factor that we can pull out. And when we look at the problem that I have here, x squared minus 25, there is not a greatest common factor. So that means we move to our next step. After we look for GCF, then we want to determine if we are factoring a special case. So we have two different special cases. We have a perfect square trinomial, which will look like this: x squared plus 2xy plus y squared. It's a trinomial because it has 1, 2, 3 terms. And it's a perfect square trinomial because the first term is a perfect square, the third term is a perfect square, and the middle term is the product of 2 and the square root of the first term and the square root of the third term. So let's look and see if we have a perfect square trinomial in the problem that we're doing. Well, right now I can see that we don't have a perfect square trinomial because there's only 2 terms in this problem. So we don't have a perfect square trinomial. But I am going to show you real quick how you would set this up if you were factoring a perfect square trinomial. You would set up one parenthesis with it being squared, and you would have x plus y squared. If you watch the recording for the lesson that we did on Thursday, you will see how to do a problem like this. If you need more help factoring a perfect square trinomial, contact me. So there is another perfect or special case that we need to look at, and that is the difference of two squares. And the difference of two squares is where we have only 2 terms, and we're subtracting them, and both terms are a perfect square. So let's look at our problem that we're working on. And we do have a difference of 2 squares because we only have 2 terms. They're both perfect squares. X squared is a perfect square, 25 is a perfect square, and we're subtracting them. So we have a difference of 2 squares. When we factor the difference of 2 squares, we set up our parentheses, and our first term in both parentheses is going to be the square root of the first term. And then it doesn't matter where your signs go, but one has to be positive, the other has to be negative within the parentheses. And our second term is going to be the square root of your second term. So let's go ahead and do our problem now. We're going to factor x squared minus 25, and we know that we're going to use this model right here to factor. So we are going to set up our 2 parentheses, and we know that the first term in both of our parentheses is going to be the square root of x squared. Square root of x squared is x. And then we set up our signs, and we know one has to be positive and one has to be negative. Doesn't matter which one. And then we take the square root of 25. Square root of 25 is 5. And that is what goes into our second term of the binomials. This is the factored form of x squared minus 25. If you need more help with factoring a difference of two squares, please make sure you contact me as soon as possible.